Today we're picking up right in the scriptures where we left off last week, in the middle of Jesus' trial with Pilate. And I've been thinking about ropes this week. We've had a lot of talk with ropes. We've done a lot with ropes during this Lenten season. And there's something about a rope under tension that if you've ever tried to untie a knot that's been pulled tight, you know what happens, right? The harder you pull, the tighter the knot gets. And you tug one side and it cinches up, you tug the other and it resists. And long time goes by and you're not loosening up the knot at all. You're, in fact, tightening it. I don't know about the ladies, but us men, we have these swim trunks and sometimes shorts with these strings in them to tighten them up, right? And never fails that they get a knot in them, right? And then you try to get the knot out and it gets tighter. And then if you have the kind of physique that I have, you can't get the shorts off while they're too tight, right? I end up having to call Tracy with a fork and like I'm 6, you know. I imagine ladies have something similar to that. The cross we bear, gentlemen, the cross we bear. But these tightened knots, they remind me of how violence works. Anger is met with anger, and force is met with force, and hurt is met with hurt. And every time we respond in kind, we think we're solving the problem. We think we're loosening the knots, but in fact we're tightening it. And our world today knows about knots, my friends. We have knots all over the place. Globally, we see it in these escalating conflicts and retaliation that just cycles and cycles and cycles. And we see it nationally, and when outrage is feeding outrage, right? I think that we could outrage somebody. We might be able to outrage somebody in this room if we walk outside and said the sky is blue, right? Someone would be outraged by that. We see it locally and personally with relationships that we have that begin breaking under the pressure, become stressed under pressure. And I think we even feel it inside ourselves, right? Quietly inside our own hearts that are the tightening of knots in our lives for many, many reasons. And the knot just gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And it's into this kind of world, into that kind of knots, we hear these words from Pilate. And, you know, I thought about the words of my mother, and probably words of many of your mothers, right? The world is going to hell in a handbasket, right? Well, I'm no prophet, but I think the world's been going to hell in a handbasket for thousands and thousands of years. It's not just 2026, right? The same could be said about 30 CE, that around this time that takes place here with Jesus. That, you know, Pilate says these words that Pilate has taken Jesus away to be whipped, and the soldiers have twisted a crown of thorns to honor him. To honor him. They've slapped him. They've mocked him, saying, "He's the man." And this is not a gentle text. This is a violent text. And so today I think we ask ourselves, what does Jesus do in a world like this? Like ours, like his? The world of violence, the system of violence. Because there's a deep belief woven into our world. The myth that force saves. That violence and retaliation and vengeance and a proportional response saves us somehow. That if we just push harder, if we fight stronger, if we win, then things will be all right. And you can feel that belief all over this story of Jesus and Pilate and the Jewish leaders. Pilate believes it. He's trying to manage the situation. He's trying to control the crowd. He's trying to keep the peace. As we said last week, he doesn't want word to get back to Rome, that he can't do his job. But when things get unstable, when he feels like he's lost control, he turns to violence. I don't think because he's uniquely evil. I in fact actually think Pilate in some way believes Jesus is who he says he is. And he's terrified about that. But when things turn unstable and get to that point, he turns to violence, not because of evil, but because he's operating within the system that believes violence begets violence, and violence solves. Violence enforces how you fix things in that world. Because the crowd, the Jewish leaders, are shouting, "Crucify him!" And if we just eliminate that problem, if we just eliminate this Jesus who's causing trouble, things will get better. But here's the hard truth. Here's the hard pill to swallow for us. Many of us believe this too. I would dare say all of us on some level believe this, or we respond or react this way. I'll raise my voice to be heard. Or if I win the argument, I will be right. Or if I get even, I will feel better. But often that does actually the opposite. It doesn't untie anything, it just makes the knot tighter. And now here's what's striking about this picture. Just like last week, we see Jesus who doesn't fight back. He doesn't escalate the situation. He doesn't retaliate. He doesn't mirror what's being done with him. He doesn't try to escape. My friends, that's not weakness. That's something far more powerful. Because I think the easiest thing in the world is to reflect back what you were receiving, right? If someone is raising their voice, the easiest thing to do is for you to raise your voice back. If someone wounds you, the easiest thing is to wound them back. If someone says something or does something dehumanizing, the easiest thing to do is to do it right back. Right? I told you about our son Kenny and the call for help. Kenny, I remember when he was in the midst of his addiction, him and I are cut from the very same cloth, and we both want to have the last word, and we both want to be right. And I remember those days of standing eye to eye, nose to nose, with Kenny, who was almost as big as I am, and each one of us wanting to get the loudest last word we could. And that didn't fix one darn thing. Just made it worse. But that's become our instinct as people. That's become our reaction, and all it does is tighten the knots. But Jesus here in the story shows us a way to break this pattern. The prophet Isaiah said he was oppressed and tormented. He's speaking about Jesus there, but didn't open his mouth. And Jesus lives this out here, not because he lacks the power, but because he refuses to let violence define him, because he is all-powerful. Mahatma Gandhi is attributed with this saying, and we're not certain it's only Mahatma Gandhi. It's one of those quotes that 5 different people said, and they can't quite pinpoint it. But Mahatma Gandhi is mostly attributed with this quote. It says, "An eye for an eye just leaves everybody blind." And violence that begets violence just leaves a world that is wounded and hurts and less than. And this is where I think our Wesleyan theology, our viewpoint as Methodists, speaks so clearly in the world. Because we believe that grace is not passive. That grace is active and transforming and is shaping us into people who don't simply react but respond. And we call this kind of work sanctifying grace. It's the kind of grace that doesn't just forgive us, but forms us and makes us into a different person. Forms us into a people who can stand in the middle of chaos like Jesus and choose a different way. So I was thinking about what does this look like, and I just was played over in my head many times the stories that we've seen about mostly men, and if we are honest, mostly black men, who have spent many years in prison but were unjustly tried, they were poorly represented, they've been poorly treated, they've been deeply wounded by a system built on power, and after all these years they've been proven innocent. And they're finally released, and they had every reason to seek revenge, right? Can you imagine that? Even if it was one moment in jail for something that we weren't responsible for, let alone decades and decades and decades. They had every reason to seek revenge, and people expected it, people were ready for retaliation, but instead, over and over and over, we hear stories of people who choose something else. They choose reconciliation, not because it's easy, not because it's ignoring injustice, but because they knew if we keep responding with violence, we will never be free of the violence. And we've seen this courage over and over again. People who absorb hatred and refuse to pass it on. People who interrupt cycles instead of continuing them. And people who stand firm without becoming hardened. And then we have this phrase that Pilate says that just kind of echoes. Here's your man. Pilate meant it as mockery, right? Same with the soldiers, with the crown and the robe and the label of King of the Jews. Here's your man, he's saying. Look at this man, Pilate says. He's beaten, he's powerless, he's humiliated. And you say, this is your king? That's no kind of king. But John's gospel is full of irony. Because Pilate is more right than he knows, because he is, Jesus, he is the man. And here is the man standing before us. Here is what humanity looks like when it is fully aligned with God. Not grasping like we talked about last week, not retaliating, not driven by fear, but grounded in love. And this is what true power looks like. It's not domination. It's not total obliteration. It's not control. It's love. It's love. It's love that refuses to become what it opposes. So here's the question for us this week. Where are we? Where am I? Where are you tempted to fight like the world fights instead of loving like Christ loves? I know I've got spots. I hope I'm not the only one. If I am, then I need to get some advice from you all on how to fix myself. Where are we tempted to fight like the world fights instead of loving like Christ loves? I think we're all there, right? We're all there, especially when we're pushed to the ledge, when we are feeling out of control, when we're overwhelmed, when we're tired. It's easy to react instead of respond. And it might just be in conversations that escalates too quickly. Right? You ever been in one of those? You get on the backside of that conversation, like, how did we get here? We were just coming to talk about something simple, and all of a sudden we are in full-fledged arguments. Maybe it's relationships where wounds keep getting reopened just when you think you're getting past something, and something, scrapes that wound off a little bit. Maybe it's the quiet places in our hearts and minds where resentment builds up. I love Bishop Michael Curry. He was the lead bishop of the Episcopal Church for so many years. You'd recognize him if you don't recognize his name. But he was there and he preached a sermon at Prince Henry and Meghan Markle's marriage, and he said these words about love. Imagine this old world where love is the way. When love is the way, unselfish, sacrificial, redemptive, when love is the way, there's no child going to bed hungry in the world ever again. When love is the way, we will let justice roll down like a mighty stream and righteousness like an ever-flowing brook. When love is the way, poverty will become history. When love is the way, the earth will be a sanctuary. When love is the way, we will lay down our swords, we will lay down our shields, down by the riverside, and study no more war. When love is the way, he says there's plenty of good room. Plenty of good room for all of God's children. Because when love is the way, we actually treat each other well. Like we're actually family. And when love is the way, we know that God is the source of it all. And we are brothers and sisters and children of God. So this is where our practice meets us this week. We've been, during the season of Lent, we've been responding together not just with words, but with our bodies each week. So I'm going to invite you to stand where you are, as you're able to. Certainly can do this seated if you need to. Now I want you just to turn to someone. Now do it ever so slyly, okay? Use your best spy techniques here. And I want you to turn to someone and make eye contact with them. Not intensely creepy serial killer eye contact, okay? But gentle, softly, kindly. We're not going to say anything yet, just with quietness, just be present with one another and make eye contact if they're near you or across the room. And we're just going to pause for a moment. If you get distracted, that's okay. Just breathe. Refocus. If your mind starts racing, that's okay. Just stay present. And now, without saying anything, without moving, without reaching out, simply mouth the words to this person. Peace be with you. You may be seated. Now that's just a small thing, right? But how often do we pause and quiet and make eye contact? Let alone say something quietly under our breath as a blessing to one another. You know, when we pass the peace, right, it's not just a time for us to shake hands and hug one another, right? There's a deeper purpose, there's a deeper meaning that you are literally bringing the peace, you know, the shalom is what we're talking about. And in Hebrew, shalom is not just that everything is copacetic and we're all at peace. Shalom means that we are all in balance, that we are holistically well. And so when we pass the peace with one another, we're wishing a blessing. We're passing the blessing that we are experiencing in our lives of this holistic wholeness. We're offering it to one another. It's not just a handshake and a hug or a kiss on the cheek or whatever. We're actually passing this wholeness, this shalom to one another. And some days you might be the one bringing a load of shalom, right? You're just experiencing this high, and other days you're the one that needs someone to pass that to you. Right? And that's why it's important for us to be here each and every week, because one day, each week, we're going to be one of those people that needs the other person, and we never know. who is going to need us or when we are going to need someone else. In a world that reacts quickly and loudly, it's a different way. It's a steady presence. It's a grounded spirit. It's a refusal to mirror the chaos that is around us. And this is just one small way we can begin to live the love of Christ together. So we think back to that rope or the shoelace and that knot being pulled too tight. Pulling tighter just makes it worse. But what actually loosens it is patience and care, gentleness. We have to have a willingness just to stop pulling and yanking on things and to start working differently. And this is what Jesus is doing on the cross, right? He's not tightening the knot of violence. He's absorbing it. He's undoing it. And Paul tells us, don't be defeated by evil, but defeat evil with good. Don't be defeated by evil, but defeat evil with good. That's not just pretty poetry. It's a real invitation for us to be people who do not mirror the world's violence, but participate in God's untying and unbinding of that violence, of that system of violence. Because grace is not only what God does for us, right? We've talked about this each week. God is not about just what God does for us, it's what God does among us as well. And maybe, just maybe, the way this knot begins to loosen is not by force, but through love, as Bishop Curry reminded us. You know, it'd be easy to pull in. I pulled in the parking lot and I had to make a couple loops, right? It'd be easy to get upset about that. And I get it, right? I can't find a parking place in my own church. But when we step back and kind of look at it from a different angle, we can be a little perturbed, right? This is going to be a challenge. This is going to be something we're going to have a new behavior we're going to have to figure out. So we have the blessing of 120 plus friends worshiping next door. And so grateful. They've been nomadic for 4 or 5 years, my friends. Living out of a trailer, going from one place to another place, getting up at 7 a.m. or arriving at 7 a.m. to set up for their 11 o'clock service, and then to pack it all into a trailer and do it again week after week after week. So they're happy to have a home. And we'll figure out the part. So be patient. Practice care. Practice gentleness. And I think we can ask ourselves this week, how might we practice a non-anxious presence in this culture of outrage? How can we be a different person who doesn't just react to whatever is thrown in front of us on a screen, in the streets, at our job, in our homes? That when we feel the pull to react, that we might pause. That when we feel the urge to escalate, that we might just breathe a moment. When we feel the knot tightening in our conversation, that maybe we'll choose differently. Maybe we'll step away for a moment. Because in a world that believes force will save, we follow a Savior who tells us differently. Who tells us it is not force, but it is love that sets us free. Amen? Amen.